Hey everybody, and welcome back to Satisfactory. I'm Drawing Chaos, and today we're going over all the best recipes in the game. That's right. From start to finish, every recipe that is going to be good and useful to use, we're going over it. But first, we have to spend 1 minute going over how to unlock alternate recipes. I know, but don't worry, I'll make this painless. Step number 1 in Tier 1, you want to unlock field research by donating your wonderful supplies to the sky. Take that, Nika, you sun god. Next up, you want to find a drop pod and show the local wildlife how much you care about kittens and puppies. Next up, scavenge the debris of an AI SpaceX driver and see what you need to unlock the drop pod location. Some will be free, some will have you sacrifice parts, some will have sacrifice soul. But either way, grab what you need and Ada will let you know. If you don't have what you need, definitely look around the area. You might find what you have just lying around in the ground. And while you're there, don't forget to take care of any bodies that you might come across. Ah yes, an unmarked shallow grave in nowhere space. Honestly, I say it's too good for him. Then when you're done, you're going to go over here to the space microwave, go and take your hard drive and throw it in here and wait a whole 10 minutes. By playing Fix-It Productor Packer Deluxe. It's so loud! Why is it so loud? Once you fail at getting the high score, go and check your space microwave and see how close you are to unlocking the next hard drive. Once it's done, you'll get a notification like when your burrito's ready. And then you can check the map and you get the privilege of choosing between 2 alternate recipes. Then the real fun begins. What do you choose? Key notes of things that I want to point out while we're actually in here is you have the ability to get extra inventory space, which is not an alternate recipe, but shows up in the hard drive, as well as you can rescan the hard drive 1 time to get 2 additional options. Now, if running around the world collecting hard drives seems like too much pain in the butt, or you don't want to touch grass, later on you can go into the Awesome Shop and unlock hard drives just for a measly 100 tickets. Just goes to show you that even in this game, everything's pay to win. So that brings us to the meat and potatoes of this whole video. What are the best alternate recipes? And I'm actually going to divide this into machines. And the reason for this is, once you have the machine unlocked, once you have the recipe unlocked, the original one, then you can be able to get the alternate recipe. So, let's say for example, I go in here, this is my lovely smelter. I have iron ingots. Once I get that unlocked, there is an alternate recipe in another machine for iron ingots. But you have to have the base recipe unlocked to get the next one unlocked. So even though it might come up in a different machine, it is still available when you get the base recipe unlocked. Alright, now that we got that down, let's start off with the smelter. In the smelter, there is exactly 1 alternate recipe, and it is an amazing. It is the pure aluminum ingot. Now, the reason this is so great is you do not need a second item to make aluminum ingots. As you can see right here, the original recipe has silica. Yes, it makes more aluminum ingots, but the original recipe sucks compared to the new one. Because let's face it, we're not trying to make as much aluminum in the world as we possibly can. Well, I mean, Kibitz is, but you know, the rest of us aren't. Well, some of us are. But this is an amazing alternate recipe if you want to simplify the aluminum setup. Next up is the Foundry. Now this one has a ton of different alternate recipes, and we will only be going over a few key ones that are amazing. Iron alloy ingot is one of my favorites because it takes iron ore and copper ore to make iron ingots. So if this is 40 and 10, that makes 50 to make 75. Early game, this is amazing, not to mention making 75 per minute. Very good in space saving. We also have a copper alloy ingot that takes 50 copper and 50 iron to make 100 copper ingots. This is also amazing in saving space, although it does not save you ore. You have 3 alternate recipes for steel. I recommend the coke steel ingot, as a lot of the petroleum coke that we have that we can make from heavy oil residue is easy to make. There's a lot of extra oil, and 75 to make 100. Oh god, how many people just had a heart attack right there? I'm leaving that in. I don't care. That'll actually give you 100 per minute. Great on saving space. Now, they just added this in 1.0, but it's a tempered Caterium ingot, which is Caterium ore and petroleum coke to make Caterium ingot. Really good early game, but not the best recipe overall. Two more recipes that actually go really good hand in hand are these alternate recipes for making steel items, such as steel beams as well as steel pipes. If you have extra concrete, and let's face it, who doesn't, you can combine that with steel ingots and make more steel items. For this one, we have the same amount of steel from one to the next, so that is a 1-to-1 with a little bit of extra concrete. Now, concrete is easy to make, and there's an amazing recipe coming up. Next up, we have a chunker of a good one, and that is the Constructor. A good one if you want to conserve space and make things a lot easier on yourself is a steel rod one, which gives you 12 steel ingots to make 48 iron rods. Very good, especially early game or if you want to make a compact build. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of slack for this, but everybody says the alternate for cast screws is great, and it is to a point. This one is very good early game, but drops off tremendously as every other recipe I choose will get rid of screws out of there immensely. I don't like screws. I don't like using them. I don't like making them. You need way too many as it is. I don't think this one's good at all. I would rather get any alternate recipe that gets rid of screws altogether. Now, new to 1.0, they have made it so that you can take aluminum ingots and make steel beams. Now, this is a 1-to-1 recipe, and aluminum is kind of difficult to make compared to steel, but you do have a better exchange rate on it. So this is one that you might actually think is pretty good if you're making a lot of aluminum ingots and you're not using them for anything in particular. Though I prefer to save my aluminum for other things, although the alternate recipe for iron pipes, even though it is a terrible exchange rate, is definitely, especially because it's so much easier to make iron ingots. In terms of wire, the original wire recipe is 1 copper ingot to make 2 wire, which kind of sucks, but if you can find the alternate one for Caterium wire, that is 1 Caterium wire to make 8 wire. Definitely saves space. It's not that hard to make Caterium, and if you're not going crazy with the build, this is peak efficiency right there. Next up, it's time to get in a little bit of a complication because we have the assembler. Now, when it comes to the assembler, we have a lot of alternate recipes that are going to be amazing. We start off with the reinforced iron plates. There is one that I love to use, which is the stitch iron plate recipe. That uses iron plate as well as wire. Now, if you're using the Caterium wire one, that is going to help you immensely because now you have plenty of wire, and iron plates, not that hard. Not to mention, it produces at 5.625 per minute compared to the regular recipe that's just 5. And it uses less iron plates than the original recipe, and screw the screws. Next up, we have one for an alternate for steel frames, which uses reinforced iron plates as well as steel pipes. You're using less reinforced iron plate, and you're using a steel pipe, which you can make out of iron, to make even more modular frames. So reinforced iron plates take a while to make. You're not making a lot of them as is. So making modular frames using this recipe, peak. Next good one is the encased industrial pipes. So normally you use encased industrial beams, and you're taking steel beams, which are harder to make, and concrete to make industrial beams, encased industrial beams. So this one uses steel pipes instead of steel beams, also using concrete. It makes less per minute, but it is so much easier and better to make. Overall, highly recommend this one for even a late game process. Now, when it comes to circuit boards, there is one that you can utilize to make only using oil, which is this one right here, rubber and petroleum coke, which is not bad because you can actually take oil and just go right into circuit boards using that. So just make it into rubber with the heavy oil residue as the byproduct. Heavy oil residue turns into petroleum coke, and bam, you got your circuit boards. But I prefer this one right here, silicon circuit boards. This uses copper sheets, which not that many, but utilize pretty easily, and silica, which a lot of things don't really use silica. and you can make 12.5 per minute. So the output on it is very good. This is a great one for mid to late tier because you can utilize all the extra stuff that you have coming in that you're not utilizing for circuit boards. Another good one is fused quick wire. This uses Caterium ingots and copper ingots to make quick wire. This produces much more quick wire than the base recipe that just uses Caterium ingots. Plus, you're using less Caterium ingots, and let's face it, you need quick wire for so many different things, and copper ingots, not that hard to make. Next up, we got the steel rotors. Now, this uses steel pipe and wire. As we established, wire's super easy. Steel pipes, we can make that from iron, and you can make yourself some rotors. The nice thing about this is, no screws. I told you, screws are the devil. You don't need them. You can find alternate recipes that negate screws altogether. Now, the funny part about this is, this produces rotors at 5 per minute. And the base recipe of stators also produces at 5 per minute using steel pipe and wire. So you can set both recipes up together in unison. Now, granted, there's one for alternate, which is steel pipe and quick wire, but these two kind of work very hand in hand, and it's a really nice one to have. Next up, we have a few nuclear alternate recipes. These are all very specific to what you want to do. The nice thing about having the plutonium fuel unit is it only takes 2 Sommersloops to make extra items, to double up what you already have. So if you were so inclined that you want to increase your plutonium output, this is actually a really good idea because utilizing this alternate recipe, although you have to make pressure conversion cubes, which are kind of a huge pain in the butt, you still can double it pretty easily. And using some power shards, you're not going to break the bank in terms of power as well. Now, there is one for electromagnetic control rods as well, which kind of seems weird once you see the high-speed connectors, which have to be made in a manufacturer, versus the original recipe that has the AI limiters, which are made in a assembler. And there is an alternate to that as well, but if you're looking at it in terms of how much quick wire you have, the high-speed connector, you can use a lot less quick wire to make this, but it is completely up to you on whether or not you want to actually go through this rabbit hole. But is it a good recipe? That one's completely up to you. All right, let's get up to one of the big boys, manufacture. We're going to start with the heavy modular frame. Guess what? There is a heavy encased frame that, you guessed it, has to deal with no screws. This one, by far, so much better. Modular frames, encased industrial beams, and steel pipes. You could have steel pipes going for your encased industrial beams. You can have concrete for these two. So that's only 3 items right here that you're utilizing for these 3 items. Modular frames, we have alternates for that as well. All of this and no screws. So much better. You can get this recipe, highly recommend it. Next up, we have this one for rigor mortar. Rigor mortar. That is hard to say. Rigor motor, like rigor mortis. This actually takes less rotors and less stators as long as you have crystal oscillators being made. And to be honest, there is an alternate for a crystal oscillator, which we'll get into in a little bit. But this really does amp up what you're making in terms of motors, which motors are definitely used for in a lot of different things. So it is really nice to have right off the bat, and you can utilize this in late game production. Say hello to turbo motor. There is 2 alternate recipes. I don't use either one of them. Not because they're not better or not worse or anything like that, because by the time you're making turbo motor, even if you're making one machine, you can have however you want the setup. By the time you get to late game, it'll all depend on what you have set up to go. Now, if you wanted to choose one of these for late game, I would recommend this one right here. Electromagnetic control rods, not hard to make. Radio control units, you'll get used to those. Motors, if you're making the rigor motors. And rotors, you're making those for the motors, so you're kind of like putting things back in there. This has stators, you know, you kind of have a lot of this stuff together. It's not too bad. And the reason I say that is because the turbo pressure motor has pressure conversion cubes, and this means you need a lot of nitrogen gas just to make this one. Although it might seem really good, the nitrogen, not that great if you don't want to really get into it. Whereas this right here, you really don't have to get into anything nitrogen related at all. Next up, we got stuff like Caterium computers, superstate computers, an alternate for crystal oscillators, an alternate for radio control units, and another alternate for radio control units. Now, the reason I'm not going too in depth on which one is considered good in any one of these, and if we actually go back over here into the assembler, I didn't mention this earlier, but there is an alternate recipe for each one of these that's in the assembler, easy to make, because each one of these is depending on your play style. So whichever way that you have been gravitating towards will depend on which one this is good for you. But for a blanket statement on which one is the best, there's no real answer for these ones. You might have your preference, you might think one is better than the other, but overall, it's kind of depends on what you've been playing as, what you're willing to go towards. If you find aluminum easy, then some of these that go to a different aluminum setup might be better for you. If you have a lot of power, or if you want to save resources, some of these might be really good. But overall, there is no blanket statement that says one is better than the other. I would say they're all use case scenarios. All right, now for nuclear as well on this one, we have the alternate for uranium fuel unit. This one right here takes more stuff to kind of go in here, but you can produce more uranium fuel rods per minute. Not to mention, with the other alternate for infused uranium cells, this helps get it refined even better. And you don't have to deal with the liquid sulfur from the original one, because the original one had you do some sulfur and then it had to go back into the system. Huge liquid mess of byproduct. This one negates it and utilizes your uranium much more efficiently. Whew, now we're going to get into a real good one, the refinery. This one right here has some of my favorite alternate recipes, like heavy oil residue, which takes 30 crude oil and makes 40 heavy oil residue. The best part about this is heavy oil residue is used for a lot of different things, as well as the pomade resin, or whatever you want to call it, can be utilized in alternate recipes to make, where is it? There we go. Residual plastic and residual rubber. So if you take all this extra Pomela Harris resin, you can combine that with just water and make rubber, or you can combine it with water and make plastic. So you can utilize that stuff pretty easily. Now, the nice thing about having all this extra heavy oil residue is it makes petroleum coke much easier, because you can go put it right into there and make power using the petroleum coke. Remember those alternate recipes we said about the petroleum coke for making steel as well as caterium? Those are some pretty good ones. Next up, the best alternate recipe for making aluminum is sloppy alumina. This takes bauxite and water to make aluminum solution. 200 bauxite to 240 solution, which the original recipe over here takes 120 to 120. So you get a nice even amount. But yes, you get silica, but we don't want silica anyway. As well as we have one alternate recipe for electrode aluminum scrap, which takes 100 aluminum solution and makes 300 scrap by taking petroleum coke. Now, because we're using the heavy oil residue alt recipe into petroleum coke, we should have plenty of petroleum coke to utilize this. Plus we get some water we're going to throw right back in the system, or make some other stuff with it. Now, coming down here into fuel, we have some regular recipes, but there's an alternate recipe for diluted packaged fuel. There is this same recipe in a blender later on that does the same thing, except for instead of packaged water, it's regular water. So it gets rid of that, and instead of packaged fuel, it makes regular fuel, which is a lot nicer. But before you're able to unlock that, you can unlock this one. So if you want to make fuel as early as possible, as efficiently as possible, this is one that you're going to want to have, because you can take the empty containers once you unpackage the fuel to put them back and package more water, and then it's a closed loop system. The next ones I want to talk about is turbo fuel, alternate turbo fuel, and ionized fuel. You have to use a hard drive to unlock either one of these, all right? But the turbo fuel, you have to actually utilize this in the MAM, you have to give it a hard drive to unlock it. And it is amazing. This one right here takes 22.5 fuel to make 18.75 turbo fuel. Whereas this one right here takes 37.5 to make 30. So yeah, it's a 5 to 4 right here, where this one is a 6 to 5. But the difference is, if you are utilizing, say, an alternate recipe for packaged fuel, you can make 30 heavy oil residue into 60 fuel. So instead of going down, you can actually make this one much better. And when you get into something like ionized fuel, it makes compacted coal after the fact, as well as rocket fuel that does the same thing, and you can take that compacted coal and throw it back in the system, thus needing less compacted coal for this original recipe. Okay, now this part is, everyone will say these are the 3 best recipes to get, especially mid-game. Pure iron ingot. Iron ore and water to make iron ingot. It'll take your 7 iron ore and make 13 ingots. That is amazing. Pure copper ingot, 6 iron ore, 15 ingots. That's basically doubling it even more so. And then of course we have the Caterium one, which is 2 iron ore to make 1 ingot. Now this doesn't seem that great, but trust me, it is so good. Now they've added in 1.0 the alternate recipe for leach stuff, which means if you take sulfuric acid, you can go from 5 to 10. You can basically double this one compared to this one where you're going 7 to 13. You're not really doubling it, but water's much better than having to go and get sulfur to make sulfuric acid. Although it's not a lot. So if you're making nuclear stuff and you want to utilize some of this stuff, I'm just saying it's possible. Now, one of my favorite recipes in the entire game is wet concrete. Let's take some limestone, let's add in some water, and we'll make concrete. A 6 to 4, which is a amazing recipe, an amazing ratio if you do not want to deal with something else like the alternate recipe for all those other ones for concrete and whatnot. This one just keeps it limestone, add in some water, give me some concrete. I'll utilize this day in and day out. It's an amazing one. The next one, because the refinery has so many good ones, is raw quartz plus water to make quartz crystals. Very efficient, 9 to 7 ratio, not bad. And a steam copper sheet. If you need a lot of copper sheet, this is the one you want to go to. 3 copper ingots for 3 copper sheets, a very good ratio. You're just adding water. When late game comes, water is easy to get to. You're going to be a pro at it. You're going to love it. Whew, that was a big one, but let's get into the next one, the more advanced stuff, because we have the blender. Now, when it comes to the blender, most things seem like alternate recipes, as we have distilled silica, which has a bunch of different stuff. Don't recommend that whatsoever. Alternate scrap, which might seem like it's good. Don't recommend that whatsoever. And a lot of this stuff you look at and you're like, what the hell? But here is that diluted fuel recipe I was telling you. And it is great because it takes this, it's the same doubling of heavy oil residue into fuel, just no packagers to worry about. So if you have this recipe, it is a good one. Also, we have a turbo blend fuel. Don't recommend this one whatsoever. Too much kind of like messing around with stuff, but you can, in the instance that you don't have a lot of coal, you can use sulfur and petroleum coke to make turbo fuel, but you also have to have fuel and heavy oil residue, so that's kind of like, yeah. And then we get into rocket fuel. Either one of these recipes are pretty good, but I recommend utilizing a mixture of both. So this one takes turbo fuel and nitric acid, all right, which is just a base recipe. There's no alternate for that. And it makes a ton of rocket fuel and extra compacted coal that can go right back into making turbo fuel. But if you want to get into some nitric gas and whatnot, you can actually do this recipe, which takes fuel, nitric gas, sulfur, and coal, and it makes a lot of rocket fuel. These are good together, but if you just want to stick with just one, you can go for just this one above the other one, because you're going to be making turbo fuel, and you know, to make it into rocket fuel, all you need is nitric acid. Now, the alternate recipe for cooling device and the alternate recipe for heat fuse frames seem pretty good. This one is not too bad, but you know, those seem like basic recipes to me versus this one that actually has to have like, you know, motors you're putting on there. Depends on what you have making, but I don't see either any of these as like a blanket statement item that you'd really want. Now, I did want to mention this one. This is an alternate for fertile uranium. Now, let's say you're not using all the uranium in the world and you want to up it for when you're making your plutonium stuff. This is the recipe you'd want to stick to, but you are wasting a lot of resources to kind of like up it. So, and then the original one, it's not too bad, you know, so it's up to you on what you want to do. I just wanted to mention that it is available for you. Next up is the power-hungry, chunky machine of the particle accelerator. Now, this one has some very useful ones, but it's only about 2 actual items. So when you get into late game, you're going to be making these dark matter crystals, which the original recipe has diamonds and dark matter residue. Now, a lot of machines are going to have certain things where they give you a extra item, which is dark matter residue. What you can do is you can get this alternate recipe for dark matter crystallization, where you take the dark matter residue that you're making from all the other machines to make dark matter crystals, so you do not need any of these original stuff to begin with. So it is one of the best recipes I could say for late game. But if you do have any extra stuff, like a lot of time crystals you're not doing and you want to add it to there, it's also not bad. Now, in terms of diamonds, there are 4 alternate recipes because the original diamond recipe takes a lot of coal. And when you're looking into some of these, they're not too bad. This one right here is oil-based, but you know, it depends on how well you've utilized your oil. If you use a lot of oil for fuel, you might not want this. But because we can make one with petroleum coke, or we can make a lot of petroleum coke, you might want to utilize this one as well. That'll be completely up to you. Next up, we got the dodecahedron, also known as the converter. And we look into here and we see that there is one alternate recipe that I really want to look at. And that is pink diamonds. Because if we take 120 coal, which is a lot less than what we had before, and some quartz crystals, we can utilize that to make diamonds in a much smaller machine at a good rate. Because 120 coal, if we look over at this original recipe that we had over here, we're looking at 600 to make 30. So how many times can we fit 120 into there? That's at least 5 times. So we can actually have 5 times less, but we're only making 30 diamonds. For a little bit of quartz crystals, we can actually make so many more diamonds. And the nice thing about that is, remember that alternate recipe we had for the refinery, where we're making quartz crystals using quartz and water? Woo! You can see how some of these alternate recipes link in together, and you can utilize them for the best of your abilities. And last but not least, we have the quantum encoder. That, funnily enough, has no alternate recipes. Check that out. Listen, no alternate whatsoever. These are the ones you get, and you'd be happy with that. So that is it. I hope you found this informative. I hope you got exactly what you wanted out of this, and you figured out exactly what recipes you want to stick with. I highly recommend a lot of the base items, such as like ingots, especially in the refineries, and some like little stuff building into the bigger stuff. It does help a lot, especially early, mid-game, and then when you're building something late game, you can pick and choose. But the best way to do it, overall, I found, is just unlock everything. Because, hey, why the hell not? Anyway, I've been Drawing Chaos. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you love this. And just have a lovely day. Bye.